also on the committee is Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn and Queens, who joins me now. And Jeffries is not just a rising member of the New York delegation, but a rising Democrat nationally. He is said to be a prime candidate for the leadership role that Joe Crowley held before being defeated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and even for Speaker if the Democrats take control and Nancy Pelosi chooses not to run. So let's start with Hakeem Jeffries today. Congressman, welcome back to WNYC.
Good morning, Brian. Great to be on.
You're on the House Judiciary Committee. That's who would hold impeachment hearings. Based on what you know today, if the Democrats take control of the House, would you?
Well, I think we'll take it step by step. We were able to fight successfully to push for Jeff Sessions to recuse himself. He then recused himself. We then fought for the Department of Justice to appoint a special counsel to investigate potential crimes being committed by the Trump campaign. Rod Rosenstein eventually relented and appointed a special counsel, Bob Mueller, who's doing a tremendous job in a thorough investigation to investigate those potential crimes, as well as obstruction of justice that may have taken place after Trump was sworn into office. I think we have to let Bob Mueller be Bob Mueller, complete his investigation, report to the Department of Justice, report to the Congress, and report to the American people. And as you indicated, Brian, I think the one thing that will be certain if Democrats take control of the House of Representatives is that we'll make sure that all the information is publicly disclosed to the American people so that we can then make an informed collective decision about the best way to proceed.
As you know, the Republicans are running, saying your committee would hold impeachment hearings more than the Democrats are. They're betting that Republicans will turn out to stop you from holding impeachment hearings. So can you reassure the swing voters of America that you won't rush to impeachment unless there's really a high crime or misdemeanor, not just because Trump's character and politics are so abhorrent to Democrats?
Well, as Congressman Jerry Nadler has indicated publicly, and he's done a tremendous job as ranking member, that we as Democrats are not going to be reactionary. We're going to follow the facts, follow the evidence, and then make a decision based on accountability after we've received all of the necessary information. It is the Republicans, as you point out, Brian, who are the ones who are beating the impeachment drum. And the reason that they're doing so is because they don't have an affirmative agenda to run on. They tried to take away health care from 23 million people, impose a draconian age tax, strip away protections for people with pre-existing conditions. It was outrageous. And then they turned around and passed the Republican tax scam where 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1%. Very modest tax cuts for everyday Americans, permanent, large, enormous tax cuts for the wealthy and the well-off and mega corporations. So they thought they were going to be able to fool the American people and run on this tax scam, but the American people are smarter than that. The tax cut bill has been rejected in large parts of America, and so they have no affirmative agenda. As a result, they are trying to excite their so-called base by claiming that we as Democrats on day one are going to launch impeachment proceedings. Nothing can be further from the truth.
And would you acknowledge that nothing impeachable to date has been revealed? The most real version of collusion, for example, hasn't been shown, like getting directly involved with or knowing about the hacking of the DNC computers or John Podesta computers or coordinating with WikiLeaks when to release that stuff, right?
Well, I think there's a growing cloud of illegitimacy that is hanging over 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue related to the strong likelihood that there was some form of collusion and a conspiracy to sell out our democracy between the Trump campaign and Russian spies to artificially place Donald Trump in the presidency, and then many have gone on trying to cover that up. Now, whether that reaches all the way up to the top and Donald Trump himself was involved, we'll have to let Bob Mueller complete that investigation, and then those facts will be revealed to the American people. But the more we learn, the more troubling things have become. And one thing is certain. There was selective memory by all of the president's men when asked over the course of the last 18 months whether they've had communication or contact with Russians, including known operatives of Vladimir Putin. who then had to change their story and acknowledge those contacts once the facts were revealed.
Including Jeff Sessions, which is why he's recused.
That's correct.
But the standard for undoing a presidential election is a very high bar. I'm sure you'll agree. Bill Clinton lying under oath about sex failed to meet that bar. That lying failed to meet that bar for most Americans 20 years ago. So defenders of Trump say, for example, after the Michael Cohen case charges last week, that an illegal payoff of hush money to Stormy Daniels or the National Enquirer, if Trump did anything illegal in those cases, as alleged by Michael Cohen's lawyer, that those would not be things to throw out a presidential election over. How much do you agree with that?
Well, I think we first have to determine whether the election has the legitimacy necessary to ensure Americans that it was conducted consistent with their will. And if, in fact, it is revealed that there was electoral fraud committed, either because of collusion and conspiracy with Russian spies to undermine the election in ways that involve a hostile attack from a foreign power, that would be deeply troubling and reason to evaluate and question the entirety of the initial election. And if there were campaign finance violations committed, the types of which Michael Cohen seems to have suggested Donald Trump was involved in, then that would be deeply troubling as well. But I think we as Democrats collectively are going to follow the facts and the evidence and not jump to conclusions and engage in a political crusade similar to what was done by Republicans to Bill Clinton in 1998. That was outrageous, and it was done simply to undermine his presidency. Now, there's a lot to disagree with in terms of Donald Trump. He has been a singular disaster, and I'm hopeful that we're going to defeat him electorally in November and begin the process of ending our long national nightmare. The impeachment question is one that goes to the heart of the Constitution and the essence of the Republic, so it's one that we're going to take very seriously, very deliberately. It is not top of mind amongst Democrats. It is being used as a political weapon against us by Republicans who have no agenda.
My guest is Democratic Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, representing parts of Brooklyn and Queens, member of the House Judiciary Committee, and rising in stature in the party generally, may wind up with a leadership position in the next Congress. Listeners, and has a leadership position right now. Forgive me, what's your position within the party in the House?
Yeah, well, thank you, Brian. Along with Congresswoman Sherry Bustos from Illinois and Congressman David Cicilline from Rhode Island, I serve as one of the co-chairs of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. And in that capacity, we've worked closely with the entire House Democratic Caucus to develop a Democratic agenda throughout the year and a half plus that we've been in the 115th Congress, and that's been anchored in the better deal for the American people on a wide variety of pocketbook economic issues. And then we work together to develop our closing argument for the people, which we will articulate over the next few months as we approach the midterm election.
And I want to get into these economy and economic policy questions with you now as we invite listeners to call in if you're in Congressman Jeffries' district or anyone else, because obviously the issues we're talking about this morning have national implications. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692, or tweet a question or a thought at Brian Lehrer. You're in a safe seat yourself for re-election, but you're helping with the national campaign for the control of the House, as you've just said, and you've been talking about what you call the For the People plan to uplift the middle and working class. What's in that plan?
Well, we want to make clear to people all across the country that we as Democrats stand for the people, and that the other side of the aisle has made clear consistently they stand for the wealthy, the well-off, millionaires, billionaires, mega corporations, super lobbyists, and their big donors. Basically, in many ways, to enhance the Trump friends and family plan. That's what they're about, and they've made that clear. Exhibit A is the Republican tax scam. We are going to stand simply for the people. And our agenda in terms of what we plan to do if we have the privilege of taking back the House of Representatives will be anchored in three issues. One, we want to focus on lowering health care costs, which will involve strengthening the Affordable Care Act, not undermining it like the Republicans have done, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, and really working hard to drive down the costs of life-saving prescription drugs, which are out of control right now for all Americans. Big Pharma has far too much power in Washington, D.C. We need to erode that and make prescription drugs and health care generally more affordable.
How do you do that?
Well, I think the first thing that we can do is to give the federal government the ability to negotiate lower prescription drug prices for participants in Medicare. It is outrageous that the law currently prohibits the federal government, on behalf of the American people, from using its bulk purchasing power, which is enormous, to drive down the cost of prescription drugs. And the only reason that is the case is because Big Pharma and their allies and co-conspirators on Capitol Hill have put into law a prohibition. And the first thing that we can do, which will have an immediate impact for all Americans, not just the millions of seniors who receive Medicare, is to drive those prices down by allowing the federal government to use its bulk purchasing power. This is a classic example, Brian, of how the outsized influence of lobbyists and money in Washington undermine the interests of the American people, and so we're going to go directly at that. We also are going to explore the possibility of creating in law the ability to monitor price gouging that takes place far too often amongst many of these companies and impose penalties that go beyond simply Big Pharma writing modest checks as a cost of doing business in connection with fines and reaping huge profits to the detriment of the American people. And so I think if we can go after price gouging, we believe, we will be able to drive down those prices as well. That's number one. Number two is to work on increasing pay for the American people, working families, middle-class folks, out of recognition that we don't have an unemployment problem right now, but we have a serious underemployment problem, and we have a wage stagnation problem, and far too many Americans are trapped in dead-end jobs that don't allow them to provide a comfortable living for their families.
Congressman, is there a way, in addition to the minimum wage, we've had others recently talking about how the Democrats are putting in their midterms platform, raising the federal minimum wage. In addition to that, are there any other proposals that you have specifically to boost wages?
Absolutely. We're going to anchor it in a $1 trillion infrastructure plan where we believe we can create 16 million good-paying jobs, not just in construction, but in the ancillary industries, manufacturing, attendant to any significant federal investment in infrastructure, and that will also have an effect on strengthening the economy, because the fact that we have crumbling bridges, roads, tunnels, ports, airports, mass transportation system undermines the ability to have a seamless 21st century economy. The American people are with us on this issue. Trump and the Republicans submitted a fake infrastructure plan that would do nothing. We have a real one that would invest $1 trillion and would be the centerpiece of beginning the process of driving up wages for the American people.
You know that Trump says, and other Republicans say, we have the lowest unemployment in so many years, including the lowest black and female unemployment rates ever, they say, and a record stock market. How do you run on the economy against a rising tide?
Well, thank you, Barack Obama, for what he was able to do during the 8 years without any support from the other side in rescuing the economy from the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. And without a single Republican vote, the situation was turned around. So Donald Trump was certainly handed a strong economy because of the foundation that Barack Obama laid. In fact, in the 8 years of George W. Bush's presidency, we lost about 500,000 private sector jobs. During the 8 years of Barack Obama's presidency, we gained 14 million private sector jobs. So it goes without saying that the Obama economy laid a strong foundation, but we have to build upon it. And one of the things that happened in 2016, Brian, was that we as Democrats missed the underlying economic anxiety of the American people. Wage stagnation is a real thing. In the last 40 years, the productivity of the American people has increased in excess of 285%. During the same period of time, wages have increased by less than 10%. So middle-class Americans, everyday Americans, working families, have not gotten the productivity benefits of their productivity gains in terms of wages. It's all gone to the privileged few. And people recognize this reality. And then when you have health care costs and other things going up, yes, you may be employed, but are you employed at a level that allows you to provide access to the American dream? The answer would be no for far too many Americans whose jobs have been lost, they've been outsourced, they've been downsized. They may have worked in a factory or plant once before, able to provide for their families. Now they're trapped in a low-end retail job that doesn't do that. And so I think, yes, the numbers look good on a cold piece of paper. But when you talk to everyday Americans, they are struggling. They are in a position where they need to be able to do better. And we recognize that reality and want to build upon what was done during the Obama presidency and do more, not just give lip service to it, which is what Donald Trump has done.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of Brooklyn and Queens with us here on WNYC. Our phone number, 212-433. WNYC, we've been talking mostly about the investigations into Trump world and the economy. On those topics primarily, 212-433-9692. And Jules in the West Village, you're on WNYC with Congressman Jeffries. Hello, Jules.
Good morning. Does the president have the power to block a Mueller report from getting to the Congress?
That's a great question, Jules. It's not my understanding that the president would have that ability. And if Democrats take control of the House of Representatives, we'll have the subpoena power, presumably to secure that document. The president could try and take our effort to court. I don't believe that any federal judge would block our ability. Now, as Brian indicated, to the extent that the Republicans remain in control in the House and in the Senate and choose not to request the report or subpoena it to the extent that the Department of Justice refuses to provide it, that is the great danger, which is consistent with the fact that many of my colleagues, House and Senate, but certainly I can speak from the perspective of those who I serve with on the Judiciary Committee and beyond, Republicans have basically conducted themselves like a cover-up caucus and have refused to hold the president and the administration accountable in any way, shape, or form. It's inconsistent with our role as a separate and co-equal branch of government. We don't work for Donald Trump. We work for the American people. The Republicans, by and large, don't get that, and that's the danger to the extent that they remain in control.
On that point, you're on the House Judiciary Committee. The Senate Judiciary Committee might be confronted with the prospect that Attorney General Sessions, who of course recused himself from overseeing the Russia investigation, will be fired or forced to resign under pressure from Trump. Here's a clip from the Today Show this morning in which Republican Senator Lindsey Graham describes the balance that he sees as needed right now.
He had to recuse himself, guys, because he was part of the campaign that's now being investigated. But we need an attorney general that can work with the president, that can lead the Department of Justice. This relationship is beyond repair, I think.
But, Senator Graham, I mean, the only beef the president seems to have against him is that he's not going to get rid of the investigation into President Trump.
Let me finish the second part. It's much deeper than that.
What else? What are we missing?
Well, we won't say on this show, but it's a pretty deep breach. And here's what I'm suggesting, that he's not the only man in the country that can be Attorney General. He's a fine man. I'm not asking him to be fired, but the relationship's not working. To replace him. Please, to replace him.
Yeah. Let me ask
you have to replace him with somebody who is highly qualified and will commit to the Senate to allow Mueller to do his job.
And will allow Mueller to do his job. Lindsey Graham on the Today Show on NBC this morning. Congressman, there was a lot in that clip. So for one thing, how much confidence does that give you in the scenario of Sessions leaving, that there would be a new Attorney General, a Trump appointee, who the Senate would only confirm if he promises or she promises to let the Mueller investigation conclude?
I don't have a high degree of confidence just because Republicans in the era of Donald Trump have largely conducted themselves like they are a wholly owned subsidiary of the executive branch as opposed to a separate and co-equal branch of government, which is envisioned in the Constitution. Now, Lindsey Graham is sort of a prime example of this. And it's ironic, as we mourn the passing of a great American hero, John McCain. You may recall, Brian, that Senator Graham once cast himself basically as John McCain's sidekick, as the heir apparent to the independent maverick streak that John McCain consistently exhibited throughout his time in serving this country. But in the era of Donald Trump, where has that been? Where is that Lindsey Graham? He has folded like a cheap suit. And at the end of the day, he's trying to have it both ways rhetorically, but I'm not convinced that the Senate Republicans wouldn't simply just rubber stamp a Trump appointee, because Donald Trump has a singular obsession with blocking the Mueller investigation from proceeding in a comprehensive and transparent way. And it would require Senate Republicans to stand up to Donald Trump, and we haven't really seen any real evidence that they've done so. They're now willing to throw their colleague, who was beloved in the Senate, Jeff Sessions, under the bus. That tells us everything we need to know.
Carlos in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC with Congressman Jeffries. Hello, Carlos.
Hi, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great day. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, Brian, for this talk. It just occurred to me, because you brought this thing up about Lindsey Graham, is that he seems to be speaking on both sides, and sometimes I wonder if he's trying to undermine Trump while looking like he's kind of like supporting him. But the reason why I called was to say that I think that strategically the Democratic Party should try to get back some of the things that Donald Trump stole from us. So I was thinking there's a lot of talk about social democracy and democratic socialism. And, a lot of Americans are entrepreneurial. They always want to make money or have a small business. Perhaps we should phrase it more as entrepreneurial socialism, where we're not going to take away any of the entrepreneurial spirit and opportunities in the United States, but we want to ensure that there will be more people with money and stable lives and stable jobs and good incomes so that their businesses can prosper, and that we are going to help them prosper, and we're also going to help create a larger market. And that goes to speaking about health care. We often look at health care and they talk about it as if it's a cost, but health care is the largest employer in the economy. Health care drives the economy. Health care is not a cost, it's an economy. Electricity is a cost. Clean water is a cost. But we know what the benefits of that have been. So when we expand health care in the economy, we create millions of jobs.
Carlos, that's a really interesting argument in support of government spending on health care in general. I'm curious, Carlos, for you, if you're a supporter of Medicare for all.
Right. Well, yes, because every single person in the healthcare industry, from the guy selling the donuts outside the hospital, pays taxes. So all we have to do is look at and see how Medicare enriches the lives of all people who are involved in that chain, that part of the economy.
Got it.
And then that would be why I would say Medicare for all, but with private sector participation as well, because Medicare does have private insurance company participation.
And, Carlos, I'm going to leave it there so I can get some other folks on. Really appreciate your call. Congressman Jeffries, are you for Medicare for all, as Bernie Sanders or others would describe it?
Yes, I do support moving toward a system of universality in terms of health care coverage in the Medicare for all legislation that was previously introduced in the 115th Congress by John Conyers. I'm an original co-sponsor and supportive of that legislation. Now, obviously, the devil is in the details, and we want to make sure that we can move toward universality of health care coverage in a way that doesn't overly burden the American people in terms of a dramatic increase in taxes. But we do need to move toward bringing to life the notion that in America, health care is not simply a privilege, it should be a right. And so the continuum to get there obviously begins with the Affordable Care Act, not undermining it, but strengthening it, possibly then considering how do we shift toward a public option where people are able to buy into Medicare, or lowering the age of Medicare. People have suggested possibly to 55, and then figuring out how we can get to a point where every single American in this country, regardless of zip code, has access to high-quality, affordable health care.
You mentioned when running on the economy before, proactively, minimum wage, prescription drugs, couple of other things. You didn't mention Medicare for all, and some people have asked, why isn't there more than this, like a 10-point Democratic contract with America or something like that, that goes to more areas of policy, immigration, which has been so contentious, or whatever the Democratic, sometimes, as you know, Democrats and Republicans don't just emphasize different sides of an issue, you emphasize different issues altogether from each other. Where is that broader Democratic contract with America this year?
Well, this year, as I indicated, Brian, we're going to focus on, listen, we have 3 words as it relates to who we are going to fight for in terms of what we do for the people, and we have 3 issues: lowering health care costs, increasing pay, anchored in an infrastructure plan, but much more than that, and then cleaning up corruption in Washington, D.C. One of the things that I think we as Democrats have to be cognizant of in the era of Donald Trump in particular is that one of the advantages Republicans have typically had as they communicate with the American people is that they talk in headlines and we talk in fine print. Now, the problem with Democrats talking in fine print is that you can govern in fine print. Mario Cuomo once said it a different way. Politics is about poetry, and governing is about prose. You govern in fine print, and the Better Deal economic agenda has a whole host of things: better deal for infrastructure, better deal for our democracy, better deal for child care, better deal for public housing, where we would invest $70 billion to help NYCHA and other housing developments across the country, better deal to protect our pensions. So we do have that fine print set of policy proposals, Brian, but we also recognize, particularly at a moment where Donald Trump dominates every single news cycle and even endeavored to hijack the spotlight that the country was putting on John McCain by his erratic behavior, disrespectful behavior, dominates the headlines, that we need to communicate in a precise, targeted, focused way if we're going to have any shot of capturing the attention of the American people.
Mary on the Upper West Side, you're on WNYC with Congressman Jeffries. Hi.
Hi there. Well, I have a comment and a major concern. I wish they would stop referring to Washington as a swamp, because the swamp is a very valuable resource saving the earth from terrible, terrible problems.
Only if you rename the swamp wetlands.
No, what I think we should say is that if you want to call Washington a swamp, Trump has turned it into a cesspool.
And what's your question?
My question is there any possible way that we can work to declare that election illegal? Because I'm more afraid of Pence than I am of Trump.
Aha. And we're going to have a whole segment later on in the program about Mike Pence with 2 authors who are going to kind of answer Mary's question and talk about Pence's role within the Trump administration. But, Congressman, how would you answer Mary's question?
Well, it's a great question, Mary. And, unfortunately, there is no mechanism in the Constitution to be able to challenge the legitimacy of an election. Now, I guess the mechanism that does exist following the popular vote is the Electoral College, but that essentially has become, a rubber stamp of what takes place on Election Day. And so beyond that, embedded in the Constitution, there's nothing such as a recall provision, for instance, where you could mount a challenge to a sitting president based on facts that are subsequently revealed. And so we have to look forward. And so that's what we as Democrats are doing under the confines of the constitutional constraints that we are operating under right now.
We're almost out of time. Let me do almost like a lightning round with you on 3 things pretty short. One on impeachment. I want to get your thoughts on John McCain. And then on the local New York primaries coming up, like for governor. I said impeachment. I meant Russia investigation. The second Manafort trial is on charges that get much closer to the president potentially because it's about Manafort not registering as a lobbyist for the pro-Russia faction in Ukraine while he was Trump's campaign chairman. Think about that. He was allegedly running the campaign of the next president of the United States while concealing the fact that he was representing a foreign government. What will you be looking to learn from that trial scheduled to begin next month?
Well, it's a great question, Brian, and I think that trial could actually reveal whether there were deeper ties between flunkies of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine and throughout Eastern Europe and countries that were formerly part of the Soviet Union and Paul Manafort and potentially the Trump campaign beyond Manafort. The thing that could be interesting here in terms of this trial is, was there some connection between Manafort, Putin's allies in Eastern Europe, Yanukovych, for instance, and the change in platform that took place during the Republican National Convention in July of 2016, where a more pro-Ukrainian provision in the platform, consistent with the position that Republicans had long since taken.
Pro-Russia provision, right?
Well, it was pro-Ukrainian, and it was changed to be more reflective of Russians' interests.
Right.
And there's a real open question as to why that was done. Was that done at Donald Trump's direction? Was it done by Manafort? Was it some combination? Was it part of a quid pro quo relative to the assistance that Russia was clearly providing to the Trump campaign? So I think this next trial could provide sort of a window into that possible connection around collusion, even though the other side consistently claims it has nothing to do with potential collusion.
Did you know John McCain? You've been in Congress a few years, and you're in the other house. Did you have any relationship?
I only got to interact with Senator McCain in passing, unfortunately. And, you know, the House and the Senate in some ways is like being in the American League and the National League. You know, we're in the same Major League Baseball, but rarely do you interact necessarily on a day-to-day basis. But I certainly admired him from afar. He was a straight shooter, a maverick. He did what he felt was right. And usually whenever he was called upon to confront something, and the moment that strikes me as being the best example of who he was as a man, was when he snatched the microphone away from someone at a town hall meeting during the presidential campaign who was trying to claim that Barack Obama, one, was an Arab, and suggesting that even being an Arab was somehow un-American, inconsistent, and was a reason to be frightened by Barack Obama's candidacy. And he addressed that head-on in a very respectful way.
And New York primary, you're an influential guy in New York. Are you taking a position on Cuomo-Nixon or on the very interesting Attorney General primary?
Yes, well, I strongly support Governor Cuomo. I think that he has gotten a lot of things done as the governor on a whole host of issues, whether that, of course, goes all the way back to marriage equality. And I was proud to have cast one of the votes in support of marriage equality while I was a member of the state legislature. The work that he's done in terms of the SAFE Act and the strong gun safety legislation. Recently, he's championed the fact that we raised the age of criminal responsibility in New York from 16 to 18. New York was one of only 2 states to have it at 16. North Carolina was the other one. He dealt with that injustice. And the list goes on and on in terms of the living wage, the college tuition reductions that he's done at SUNY. It's been phenomenal in terms of his governorship, and I think there's still more work for him to do, and I look forward to a third term. In terms of the AG's race, you've got 4 qualified candidates. I'm supporting Tish James. My colleague, Sean Patrick Maloney, I think would also be a very good attorney general if he's successful, although hopefully if he's not, he'll be able to retain that seat, which is an important one for us to be able to get to the majority in the House of Representatives. And I will say on that race, I know that there's another candidate who has projected herself, Zephyr Teachout, as a strong, authentic progressive, but I think this is an example where she herself has faced some questions around past positions that she's taken during the 2016 campaign when she was running in the Republican-leaning district. And so I would just urge everyone to take a hard look at all of these candidacies, and that we as Democrats can't get into a situation where we lift up someone as ideologically pure and everybody else should be dismissed as too pragmatic.
That's a stronger knock than I expected to hear against Zephyr Teachout. Doesn't Maloney have the same problem? Or does, I don't want to ask it like I know, does Maloney have the same problem, having also run for Congress in a Hudson Valley swing district?
Well, I think from Maloney's standpoint, he at least has a record that can be evaluated up or down in terms of votes that he's cast. Now, he's consistently, I think, cast votes that progressives would conclude on almost every issue uplifts values that you would expect a Democrat to have. Now, that's not to say, as I indicated, all four candidates are qualified. I just think that some of the attacks that we've seen, for instance, on Tish James, relative to her refusal or unwillingness perhaps to take the Working Families Party line, which seems to have undermined her authenticity in some quarters, are unfair when directed at her, but we're not fully evaluating all four of the candidates when you have one, for instance, who billed herself as a Rockefeller Republican just 2 or 3 years ago.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from parts of Brooklyn and Queens, and very relevant to what's going on in Washington right now, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Always a pleasure, Congressman. Let's keep talking.
Brian, thanks a lot. Great to be on with you.